Hello and welcome to the webinar Recovered Carbon Black for Bankers and Investors. Hello from Berlin. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. A special welcome to those who watch the webinar later on as a recording. I have the special pleasure to do this webinar with two of my friends whom I want to welcome right now. Please welcome Paul Eiter from Notch Consulting.
Hi, everyone.
And Shane Pearl from Alpen Group. Hey, Paul. Hey, Shane.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so today's topic really is to bring recovered carbon black closer to finance people and explain recovered carbon black to non-technical people to encourage investors to invest in the industry. So I will share my presentation in a moment, and I need to get rid of this. Okay, so this is today's agenda. We will start with who are you, who is the audience, who are we. We'll talk about the circular opportunity, and you can see the little sketch on the right-hand side. We'll start with carbon black, which goes into tires. Then tires are recycled, and the tire recycling by Paralysis is producing green products which can go back into tires. And the green products, they could include circular carbon black made on the furnace process. They could include recovered carbon black. And then we'll talk how we could work with you, with investment companies and investors to help you with the investment in this industry. There's some little fine print, a little disclaimer. This is a free webinar, so we don't accept liability. Don't take this as investment advice, this webinar, and please don't sue us if we weren't 100% right with predictions. So let's start with who are you? Signed up for these webinars are the following types of companies: financial services, for example, Macquarie, investment banking, Bank of America Securities, Hamilton Clark, Arctic Securities, corporate finance, Valley Road Capital, private investment companies like Warsaw Equity Group, who have invested into the Paralysis company Contec, Financial Accelerator, Green Loan, two tire companies, Enzo Tires and MRF Tires from India. Enzo being a new startup tire company, toll producing and producing tires for electric vehicles from sustainable materials. There is from tire recycling, GRP from India, a reclaim producer. From the chemical industry, there's Mitsubishi Corporation, and one sign up is from Capital Carbon, a recovered carbon black producer.
And Martin, there are others. That's not the complete list. There are, from my understanding, many others as well.
Yes, we hope so. We hope so.
Yeah.
So, Shay, would you like to continue with the challenges these companies have with recovered carbon black?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. I think when I look at the whole industry, it's you know, the technology partner selection. If you're looking at making an investment in this area, you have multiple decisions to make. And first is, you know, who is the technology that's out there, and you're evaluating. And this is sort of a bit of a specialty that I look at when that Martin covers is, you know, what are the different stages of the companies. And Martin, maybe you could jump in here a bit. And on the TRL selection, you have the X, and you know the exact numbers because this is your area. I'm more the oils guy. But on the technology partner selection, you have companies that are coming through it on a TRL, which is a technology readiness level. And you're more or less on paper and thinking about it on a 0 to 3 scale. 4 to 6, you're in the stages of doing it in your labs and producing it. And then 7, 8, and 9 is when you're physically having it on in production. And as you look at that stage, you have a long list of companies in there. And it doesn't mean you always have to choose ones at the end. You have to choose the right one that's going to be moving through the process in the most energy efficient way with good products. And obviously, if you look at what are the success factors in my mind for a tire paralysis company, it's a bit of, you know, having the idea and the technology themselves to begin with. Do they own the technology, or are they licensed it from someone else? Not then it's a bit,
Yes.
yeah. Your next, and I say the next one, your key factor in success is, you know, the management and the corporate structure, and this is almost this dealing with startups. Having the idea alone is not going to get you to the final stage. It's what is the management style? Who are the people? Who are the people who can take that technology and drive it? The third piece is the ability to raise funds. And that's part of this dealing with startups, and raising funds also equals risk evaluation and management of that. Now you have, if you think of it this way, you have the technology, you have the people and the structure around it, you have the funds. Now you hit the plant and the process. It's the ability to build the plant and operate it. And this is your EPCs, being able to manage those EPCs, the operations. This is, you know, you have to remember at the end of the day, this is not just mechanical recycling. One of the comments I've heard from some of these operators is at the end of the day, you are running quite often a small world scale, but a chemical plant. And at the end of the day, you're boiling gasoline and diesel. So it's no small feat in what you're doing. And then last but not least, you have to have knowledge on the products. You have, you know, your primary raw materials is tire or tire crumbs, and the output is the RCB and the oils, all of which are very specialized, at least on the product side, very specialized products with chemical properties, different markets in which you're selling that vary by geography. And that's some of what we'll get into here. But that's, when I look at this, these are your challenges. And I break it into 5 areas of what you have to be successful. And obviously, Martin or Paul, jump in.
I think you covered it. That's a fantastic
particularly
overview.
Sorry, Paul.
Sorry.
And this is what the finance world wants to know, and where conflicts could arise, because very often investor companies, they will not consider any plants lower than TRL 8. They want to see an industrial installation. They certainly want to see permits and feedstocks. Then the question is the product a commodity? I think we can, at this stage, already say it's not yet a commodity. Is it under ecology or economy a business driver? Maybe in Asia, it's cheap replacement material, whereas in the West, these kind of materials are more looked at sustainable products that can help the industry become green.
Agreed.
Okay, so who are we? I make the start. I've been working 8 years on recovered carbon black, and I specialize in tire-to-tire recycling. I'm the founder of the Smithers Recovered Carbon Black Conference, which took place again in Berlin last year in November with 260 attendees, showing the importance of this material. I'm working with many and most of the global RCB producers. I work with big brand owners like Decathlon, Mitsubishi, BASF, Michelin, Bridgestone, and many more. I realized also that technology is not sufficient for making a change, but people need to change. And I'm also a certified coach. And maybe you've seen me pretty active on LinkedIn and YouTube. And my background is in carbon black polymers and titanium dioxide. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks. Thanks, Martin. My name is Paul Ida. I founded and run Notch Consulting, which is based in Massachusetts. We're a market research firm focusing on supply and demand for the tire industry primarily. I cover mainly carbon black, recovered carbon black, precipitated silica, and then rubber chemicals like antioxidants, accelerators, tackifiers, sulfur, and various other materials, all of which go into mainly into tire compounding. I publish, on the carbon black side, I publish the Carbon Black World Data Book, which is published annually and updated regularly and has a monthly price report included. Subscribers to that, it's pretty widely read report in the industry, widely quoted. Subscribers include 8 of the top 10 carbon black makers and 7 of the top 10 tire makers worldwide. And this will be the 20th anniversary. The new edition coming out this summer will be the 20th anniversary of that book, that report. But I do cover carbon black going back another 10 years before that. I also wrote Prospects for Recovered Carbon Black with Martin. We're working on an update now, so that'll come out in February. So that will be an annual report covering the recovered carbon black industry. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested in that space to also look at that report. And on the speaking side, I am very familiar with all of the main carbon black conferences: Carbon Black World, Carbon Black Perspective in Asia Pacific, and China Carbon Black being three of the most prominent, but also Tire Tech in Europe and several others, Traction and several others. So I'll pass off to Shane. I'm happy to be here and happy to say hi to everyone.
And Paul, you're not just a keynote. You're the keynote speaker.
Yes. Well, and also in Recovered Carbon Black Conference, remember?
Yeah. Thank you.
Over to you, Shane.
Yeah, Shane Pearl. I founded Alpine Group in 2013, and it's primarily focused all in on oils for the carbon black feedstock, as well as oils in the tire paralysis side of things. My background, chemical engineering and MBA, and worked for BASF for nearly 15 years. Then I went into the carbon black industry with Cabot and worked for them for nearly 5 years in the feedstock realm. And then in 2013, went and founded Alpine Group, which is a company that focuses in on all things raw materials for carbon black. And the three primary areas it's coming from, the petrochemical industry, from ethylene crackers, refiners, and from the steel, a byproduct of steel production. And part of what drove me to found Alpine Group is that they are such diverse industries. It's very rare to find someone who has all three of those, how they interact, how that turns into carbon black feedstock from both a technical and commercial perspective, and what are the relative commercial factors that tie into what the values of those should be, as well as where the trends are going, which when you look at the carbon black feedstocks and they're 60 to 80% of the cost of goods sold, it has a huge impact on the virgin carbon black industry. And how I wound up here talking on tire paralysis is when you were looking at tire recycling and tire paralysis, because the carbon black can have a factor of 2 to 3 times the pricing of the oils, quite often companies start out of the gate all in on carbon black. And then they're in the process and it becomes, what do we do with these oils? So I started receiving quite a few calls of, okay, how do we optimize these oils? What do we do to sell them? What's the market pricing? How do we move them? And that's how I evolved into tire paralysis oils and whatnot. And maybe coming back a little bit to my side, I also founded a company that blends and moves all of these oils based out of Europe, and supplies that into the industry across the European continent. So that's another side of it, which is that last bullet point there: marketing, business development, and let's call it logistics optimization and services. And
thanks, Shane. So I guess what we are saying is between the three of us, we can cover almost any needs in the carbon black and recovered carbon black space.
Yeah, and I would say that's what makes it interesting for the three of us to work together. That we have a slide somewhere in here where we cover the value chain, and you could almost, from top to bottom, from the oils of the raw materials to the tires themselves, plus the circular aspect of recycling them. Each of us cover various portions of that segment. We have a hair of overlap here and there, but ultimately we cover it from top to bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So what is the circular opportunity? Paul, do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Martin. Well, obviously, the probably the primary driver right now, or one of the primary drivers in the tire industry, as in so many other industries, is sustainability going forward. And many, if not most, of the leading tire producers worldwide have announced extremely ambitious sustainability goals through 2025, through 2030, through 2050. So we're looking at a very long-term shift in the industry and a long-term focus on sustainability as a core driver of recipes in the tire industry, product development, how tires are made, how tires are used, and how tires are recycled. And I believe that we're moving toward an era where that chain will become increasingly controlled internally. In other words, tire makers are taking more and more of an interest in what their tires look like at end of life and how that can affect the production process at the beginning. And I think that's an important step that we're taking. And I have seen just personally, just my observation, just since Martin started the RCB conference, which the first one was, when was that? 2018? The first one when we had it as part of Carbon Black World. Yeah, I mean, I've just seen tremendous growth in interest in the RCB conference and tremendous growth in the sector overall. So I'm really excited to be part of it and also to talk about sustainability. But just to go on with the slide, obviously tires are primarily made from fossil fuels, high CO2 emissions for virgin carbon black production and many other materials involved in tires, including synthetic rubber, and so. Traditionally we've had an issue with end-of-life tires and what to do with them. And there's various other solutions for end-of-life tires. But one of the solutions, I think Martin will talk about this in detail in another slide, so I don't want to go into in too much detail. But one of the issues is to actually recycle the end-of-life tires into sustainable products. And as Martin has presented here, this is data from the Recovered Carbon Black report that we wrote together. And this is actually material that was talked about by Bridgestone and Michelin at the most recent Berlin conference for the Recovered Carbon Black, which is, they were targeting a very realistic, what they felt was a realistic projection of 1 million tons of recovered carbon black in the market by 2030, with a value of $1 billion. And a pyrolysis oil market of 1.3 million tons in the same year, 2030. So right now, we're looking at the scale up. I think we've reached a point where recovered carbon black has proven it has a place in tires. I think it's proven that it can function well in tires, either in a blend with virgin carbon black or in some other mixture with existing materials. And the issue now has become scale up and has become producing at scale. How do we get to that? I mean, that 1 million tons is quite ambitious, as you'll see later. We do have some projections about where the market is right now, and there's a lot of work to be done to get to that million mark. So the issue is, how do we fund it and how do we build that capacity? How do we scale up while keeping quality and consistency across the board? So do you guys have anything to add to that slide?
Yeah, I think to me, when I look at the problem, I think it's almost interesting to look at, why is tire paralysis here and where were the tires going beforehand?
Right.
And you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I always heard the number was around 1.7 billion tires are produced a year. And that there's a rule of thumb in Western Europe and the United States that more or less one person in your population equals 1 tire per year consumed. And then you start doing that math and you break it down and how many tons of tires are available in the market. And then, if you take the US, 330 million people roughly, and I believe the number comes in around 3 million metric tons of tires in the US on that math.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, well, where are they going now? And you have a large percentage that are used for their BTU values, and that's being burned in cement kilns with a very ugly CO2 footprint. They're being used in what I would call the caveman of tire paralysis, which is where you're doing a rudimentary tire paralysis process and producing tire-derived fuel, and then all that beautiful, wonderful material that could turn into carbon black is used as a sludge and sold for its BTU value. So that's still out there. It's not ideal, but relative to the true value of what you could be pulling out of the tire. Then you have others where it's being put into playgrounds, and when you see the World Cup we just watched, I don't know if we actually saw that. I think that was all good grass, but other football fields in the U.S., you'll see the granules of rubber fly up. It's in there, rubber mats, and then maybe I'm missing an application, and then tire paralysis, where it is, I think, the emerging, and definitely when we get into those numbers, the emerging technology to take on all those other recycling methods. And you look at it from economics, emissions footprint, and various other ways to look at it, it should, and it is, the primary and most beneficial for the economics and environment to handle the tire recycling, tire circularity factor. So I think just looking at the problem and then the solution is how I was looking at this. But go ahead.
Yeah, and if you look at existing investors, I think that's interesting. Of course, tire industry has invested into Paralysis, Bridgestone, Michelin, Continental, chemical company BASF, and then a long list. And I took just a couple of example: Carthon Commodities in Delta Energy, Warsaw Equity, Contact, Sim, and I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. Arave Pa Ventures. And they are Boulder, and Capricorn and Brightlands are Vector Carbon. So there's movements in the industry. The industry is not yet commoditized, but there's movement and investors. Yeah, sustainability in the tire supply chain. I marked this slide with a carrot, and I won't go into the images. They are quite small. But what financial people and investors should know is principally, how does the raw material portfolio of a tire maker look like? And here we can say everything black or gray is either fossil-based or made with a lot of energy, fossil energy. And there's really biomaterial, there's only natural rubber. And this is a model tire maker. This is not any of the known tire makers. You might know there is always a mix of tire products, most of it being passenger car tires, some truck tires, maybe specialty tires, industrial tires. Fillers out of that are generally 25%. Now in the West, in Europe and North America, silica has been eating into the carbon black volume in tires. And this is how a tire is composed. So if we have sustainability objectives for sustainable materials, tire makers first need to tackle the resins, because they are half of the tire composition. Next up are fillers. So if they want to make green tires, they start with resins and then look at fillers. I won't go into detailed sustainability objectives. They're well documented. All the big tire makers you can see here on the timeline to 2050 not only have sustainability, so bio-based or recycled materials goals, but also carbon emissions goals. Within the carbon emissions, there's one interesting development, and that can explain why the tire industry is so interested in low carbon fillers. And that is a model I made based on a tire maker's model. And that shows that an internal combustion engine car tire has about 86% of the carbon emissions during its use phase. That's the engine producing the carbon dioxide. And the dark blue and the light blue raw materials and production are really almost negligible. However, when you look at an electric vehicle, like a Tesla, or now every big car brand has 100% electrical and hybrid electrical cars, then it looks very, very different, because maybe the electric current is a green electric current, so there's less carbon dioxide during the use phase, which makes the raw materials and the production much more pronounced. So this is one of the motivations of the tire makers to look at sustainable materials. Very small image. These are the carbon emissions of the EU carbon black industry. And in the EU, like in other places, there is a carbon credit trading system, and there's some credits allocated to the industry. But every year, as we approach 2050, every year less. The exact path in the EU to 2050 is not yet confirmed, but the light blue curve is showing. What we can say in 2020, it's too small to read, but in 2020 already, the real emissions were higher than the credits, meaning that the EU carbon black industry had to pay for their carbon dioxide emissions. And that is a motivation for this kind of industry.
Let me just jump in there, Mark, just add that, I mean, absolutely that's true, and that we've seen now the introduction of a surcharge to carbon black pricing specifically for CO2 in Europe. So that's not theoretical, obviously. It's actually impacting the price of carbon black as we speak.
And then, Martin, I would make one comment on here, and it's in your upper left-hand quadrant here, the tire raw materials, and how this ties into if I'm an investor or someone looking at doing one of these projects. What I would pull out of there is when you know, one of the questions I ask tire paralysis companies is, looking at their pro forma, how do you handle it when you have to compete on a pure virgin basis? And then what kind of premiums do you get for sustainability? And that graph right there links you to sustainability, because you look at the natural rubber, and at least in Europe, that natural rubber turns your fuels into a biofuel. A biofuel that when you're looking at these oils that come off that I'll talk about later, a biofuel has a much higher premium aspect, or a demand on it, which drives a premium in the market. So the fact that you can take a tire which has that 20 to 30% natural rubber, and that is a high percentage of what turns into the oils, and have that share be a bio-based fuel, it really drives the demand and obviously the pricing for those oils. So that's one of the things I take away from it. And then there's a question in the corner, at least I can see. I don't know if you saw a question pop up here. I don't know how you want to answer.
Yes. Let's say hi to Karina Potaski from Argentina. Hello, Karina. Nice to see you in the webinar. Okay, so I think, Paul, you are the expert on carbon black. Why was carbon black put into tires? Because I think in the 20s, tires looked like that, right?
Well, carbon black has a number of functions in rubber and in tires specifically, but the biggest one is reinforcement. It makes rubber much more durable and much longer lasting. It extends the life of a tire. I read somewhere, and I've always repeated this, but I've never actually done, looked into it. But I've heard that tires without carbon black have a life of maybe 6,000 miles. Obviously, that's a different world than the one we're talking about now. So the two, and we'll talk about this later when we talk about the grade structure. But the basic answer is it reinforces it. It also adds to the elasticity and the ability of rubber to flex and offer all the things that we want rubber to do when it's on a car, which is to act as the contact point between the vehicle and the road. And carbon black brings a lot of those qualities, silica as well, to the tire. And I would add on top of this, I mean, we're talking here about tires, and tires is the focus of this talk, but obviously tires are probably 65% of carbon black use. Another 30%, 25 to 30% is in what I call MRG, which is mechanical rubber goods. So non-tire rubber goods. That would include hoses, belts, gaskets, seals, weather sealing, weather stripping, any of the rubber parts, mainly that we see both on cars and anything else you can probably name, appliances and industrial equipment and mining equipment and
conveyor belts at your supermarket,
conveyor belts, everything like that. And then the last category, which is smaller in volume but very important in terms of product development and technology, is specialty blacks, which is everything, for me, I define as everything that's non-rubber. So all non-rubber uses of carbon black, and that's mainly in the plastics industry, master batch, black film, black plastic garbage bags, and agricultural film, and then any kind of black plastics, whether they're extruded or blow molded, would include carbon black. And then the smaller, long end of the tail is paints and coatings, adhesives, printers, printer inks and cartridges, anything like that. And then there's a range of one big area is conductive blacks, which are now growing. They're a very small segment of the market in volume terms, but very important for product development. So there's a long tail of smaller applications. I would say tires are a solid 2/3 of the market overall.
Thanks, Paul. I think that is what Shane is indicating here with that scheme that shows the whole value chain, supply chain of carbon black. Shane.
Yeah, Paul, you just more or less went right through this whole value chain area. So I look at this, and it's maybe something. It's generally something I always start with in all my presentations, because I like to have a pictorial. Maybe that's how my brain works, but an overview of the industry from top to bottom, of what is carbon black, where does it come from, what are the raw materials, and I can do that. And then what I was talking about earlier is where we each of us have our areas of focus. You can probably draw different, maybe it's not straight lines, but lines through this and say, okay, hey, this is Martin's expertise, Paul's expertise, and Shane's side of it. And when I look at this, and I'll start from the bottom, just to give you a feel for carbon black, which is, roughly 40 some odd % of the tire after pyrolysis, how the carbon black is produced in a virgin sense. You're taking heavy, highly aromatic oils. Those come from the steel industry, which is coal tar, ethylene bottoms, the chemical industry, decant oil from the refining industry. And then in the circular aspect, the other 45% of a tire, when it goes through a pyrolysis process, comes back as oils. And you can take a certain percentage of that and put it right back into a carbon black feedstock. Now, each of those raw materials are, as you would imagine, very diverse and scattered around the world, and based on a region's density of either coal-based products or the development of the industry, those boxes on the bottom are drivers or fairly well mixed. In the U.S., you have we're refinery-based, so we are primarily the decant oil. You look over at the emerging market, or at least in a construction sense, there's a vast amount of steel being produced in Asia, China. So they are primarily driven by coal tar that drives their carbon black industry. And those are the oils you're competing. The next layer is more or less, how does that material, sometimes it's delivered direct. Quite often there's companies in that range that pull them together, blend them, move them. And that's something I'm active in on the other side of my world. Then we have the virgin carbon black producers. These are the Orions, the Cabots, the Burlas, and a long list of other company names. And Paul, this is what we were just going through. And if you take where does it go into, and it's elastomers and non-elastomers.
Right.
And I would say there's a bit of commoditization on one side versus the other. Some companies view the elastomer side as their core business and the non-elastomers as their specialty business. And quite often there's a technical degree of separation in those two.
Yes.
Tires, high 60%, and then they go along, and pricing for those also vary as well. In general, with the blue, the elastomer side being more of the non-premium products, where the specialty going into plastics, paints, inks, paper are more of the premium side. Again, this just helps draw the overall picture, and then you see tire pyrolysis oil in the bottom, how it comes back from the tires. And I don't know if you can see my mouse, but anyway, coming back from the tires into the tire pyrolysis oil.
Yeah, that's a great slide, Shane. That really shows it.
Yeah, again, I like to start with pictures. So
let's go to what is carbon black. So carbon black is made with the furnace process. You can see a little reactor picture over here. The reactor is heated with natural gas, and heavy fuel oil feedstocks are injected. Generally, almost 2 tons of oil are needed for 1 ton of carbon black, 1.7 tons of oil per ton of carbon black. And then as a function of the particle size, the reaction is stopped with quench water. And that makes these particles that look like this. I have a little 3D model here, and like shown on the slide. So on the surface, we have mainly graphitic carbon, but a little bit amorphous carbon, so mixture of crystalline and non-crystalline carbon. Primary particles that really define the carbon blacks, but they're never individual. They're always in aggregates. And the shape, the structure, and the size of the aggregates determines what is the grade of carbon black. And then, of course, these materials agglomerate, and agglomerates are loosely bound. but they're still a powder. So the industry is granulating or pelletizing the carbon black, that it's a non-dusty material that can be conveyed and also that can be transported in an efficient way. Paul, anything I forgot about carbon black aggregates and particles?
No, that's very complete. That's a great slide, and it just shows sort of the morphology of carbon black. Good presentation. Well, let me jump in here and just talk about sort of what carbon black, the types of carbon black, and again, when Shane earlier was talking about the elastomer side, this is mainly standardized ASTM grades of carbon black. So there's really carbon black can be divided into two. Carbon black grades can be divided into two categories, and here we call them soft grades on the left and hard grades on the right. We also will use the term reinforcing for hard blacks and semi-reinforcing for soft, or more commonly in the industry we would call them tread grades, which is hard blacks, and carcass grades, which is soft grades. So those are all terms for exactly the same thing. So you could call them soft, carcass, or semi-reinforcing. You call them hard, tread, or reinforcing. And they're basically defined like that based on what they do in the recipe. Hard blacks are reinforcing grades. They toughen the rubber and they're used in the tread. They're called tread grades because they're literally used in the tread to toughen the tread and give it better wear resistance and longevity. And soft blacks are added because they make the rubber more supple and increase. They also can affect permeability, for instance, in the inner liner, or make the sidewall more flexible. So those grades, the big ones there on the soft side are 550, 660, and 772. And on the hard side, you have the 100 series, 200 series, and 300 series, with N330 there right in the sweet spot, being I think the largest volume grade used in the world. And then down in the corner, if you look, you see the thermal blacks, which are N990, N991. Those are really called non-reinforcing blacks. They don't have reinforcing properties. They're not used in rubber in the way that furnace blacks are. They do have their own unique set of applications, but they're not really competitive with or in the same category as furnace blacks. So they're the largest structure, and they're non-reinforcing blacks. They're also non-tinting blacks. They're not particularly intensely black in the way that furnace black is, which is why it's used for tinting plastics and things like that. And then not sort of off on the side here, we have non-ASTM up in the corner, which is sort of its own category, smaller volume, but important nonetheless. But for what we're talking about, and I just wanted to mention, if you look there, there's some data from the data book, which is, the global industry is about 14 million tons, 13.8 in 2021, with a value of about 17 billion in 2021. And I guess we'll talk about those soft grades in another slide, Martin. I don't want to go into too much detail there but basically, our recovered carbon black primarily falls into that soft side. It basically they fall into a 700 or 600 series carbon black once you take all the carbon black from the tire.
What I also think is interesting here, and I hope it's not my computer making these noises. People keep pinging me, and I get all these beeps. If you hear the beeps, tell me. I can turn that off. But I don't know my keyboard clicking. Then apologies. But anyway, what I take away from this is, if you're coming at this to say I want to be involved in tire paralysis, and one of the key factors of being successful in a company that you might be partnering with or investing in is knowing the market, understanding the products, and where do they go. I think one of the takeaways here is right now, where is RCB competing with the virgin carbon black market the most, and where is it potentially going? And, is it competing in more the commodity, which is the lower cost areas? And I think the answer there is yes. But then also, I think there was a very interesting presentation at Tire Tech this past year by a top virgin carbon black producer that stated they're very forward thinking relative to tire paralysis. They took the oils from tire paralysis and put it into their furnace black process. That picture in the last slide with the let's call it the flamethrower looking thing in the bottom, the reactor there, they put those tire pyrolysis oils into a furnace into a thermal process, the furnace, and produced on spec N234. So, not only is there two different methods of coming at circularity, is can you take the RCB and have it replace, let's call it an N660 or 772. That's one of the primary questions out there. But can you also take the oils and then produce on spec carbon blacks? And they're coming at it from both sides of the industry. So I think it's a very good thing from a tire pyrolysis operator. Not only do you have to sell your carbon black and compete with these on a virgin basis, but you have to sell your oils, and one of your outlet markets is the carbon black industry themselves as their raw materials.
At that point, I think, the oil and the recovered carbon black, they're pretty much like Siamese twins. So if you want to produce the circular carbon black, that needs to be sold not against, but together with the recovered carbon black. Because the tire pyrolysis needs to sell all outputs of the process.
And I would just jump in here to mirror what Shane said. On the oil side, I think we see that on the RCB side as well, which is to say that I think 5-8 years ago, the virgin carbon black industry looked at RCB as a competitive product, much in the way that they probably approached precipitated silica 20 years ago, which is to say, here's somebody coming to try to displace us in the formula, in the recipe. And I think in the same way that pyrolysis oil can be used to produce virgin carbon black, which I believe is a very interesting and fruitful application for it, I think RCB has a much more complementary profile to virgin carbon black than I think was initially seen. And I think we've seen the virgin carbon black suppliers sort of come around to that way of thinking. The biggest example being Burla's investment in Circtec, which is building a recovered carbon black plant in the Netherlands now. So that's one of the partnerships. There's been several others, but including between Boulder and Continental in the U.S. here and several other companies. So I just think that we've sort of changed our view of RCB as being a competitive product and more being a complementary product, which I think is the way forward. So I'm happy to see those developments.
Yeah. So in this slide, we went from the carbon black to the tire, and obviously every tire section has their specific carbon blacks due to the functionalization of the carbon blacks. Now we get to the recycling. I won't dwell on this because we want to really focus on the pyrolysis. And I told you my passion is for tire-to-tire recycling. And these are the three processes that allow to put a end-of-life tire into a new tire. And they're mechanical, making a powder, typically smaller than 140 mesh. But this is a displacement filler. This is not an active filler. Now there's a couple of new developments, a couple of companies that activate the surface of these rubber powders, and then they are true reinforcement materials. The market is like double-digit kiloton market for these powders. Then we get into the area of chemically selective recycling, devulcanization and reclaim. Reclaim is a well-known material. It's used. It's the most used tire recycling material, and we have about a triple-digit kiloton market, so triple-digit 1,000 ton per year market for this kind of material. And then we get to the pyrolysis. And the interesting thing is I did a survey with tire industries representing 65% of the global tire production. Paul, tire production is something like 70 million tons per year, right? The global tire production. So that is quite a number. And 7 out of 11 said they have recovered carbon black on the radar, because it is so versatile. And we got, as Paul mentioned, the call to action in the conference, RCB Rubber, Michelin and Bridgestone collaboration. And as Paul also said, we have like million ton market by 2030. which of course needs to scale up, which is one of the challenges, of course.
And Martin, just to comment on that, I think, and Paul mentioned that earlier, I feel that in the past year, the biggest difference I've just felt at the conferences has the tire paralysis process. The end products have gone from a push, meaning the tire paralysis companies were pushing them into the virgin carbon black, pushing them into the tire production process back in 2018. It was a hard sale. Now it's inverted, and you had the tire companies, you had major chemical companies standing up and stating, hey, we are here to support you. We are here to invest in you. Some are doing it. Others are looking for opportunities. And both from the demand side, and you also had it from the supply side. You had government agencies who showed up and stated, hey, we have a massive, it was a South American country, I sat next to them, government representatives stating, we have a massive tire problem in our country. We want to invest as a government in this to help reduce the supply side, the tires themselves. So it's kind of, I see a pull coming from all sides. You have more of a higher energy from the governments and other environmental agencies to clean up the tire problem. Yeah, and then the sustainability drivers coming through the chemical companies and the tire companies to pull the circularity into their end products. So it feels like there's a ton of momentum coming at it.
Which is good to see. Yes, thank you, Shane.
Yeah.
Tire paralysis, quick look at the time. I think we're running a little bit late. Are you guys okay to run over the hour?
Sure.
Because we have the main course of the presentation still in front of us. And I hope today we're streaming both on LinkedIn and YouTube, and I hope we don't get a hard stop from either systems. So this is tire paralysis and the typical process and mass flow, any type of tires. And at the moment, we're only looking at really tires recycled with the paralysis. There's a big upside, of course, non-tire materials. The trouble is they get too small to be collected. A standard car has about 600 little pieces, at times only 2 grams, so that's very difficult to recycle. But the tires are, big enough to segregate and recycle. Most of the processes run continuously, and then we need to granule the tires to get the steel out because the steel could block any continuous systems. We apply heat in an inert atmosphere. I'm mentioning nitrogen, but there's also technologies that use steam. Theoretically, you could use carbon dioxide, anything. You apply a heat, and the heat I'm specifying here, I think that's something that will become more and more of interest to the industry, is the heat efficiency. That's the theoretical heat we need. Of course, any industrial system is not 100% efficient, so we need to put in more heat than that per ton of granulate. And then we make a gas, we make an oil, and we make recovered carbon black. One comment on the recovered carbon black coming out of the process: it's not yet recovered carbon black, it's raw recovered carbon black. It needs to be refined, typically milled and granulated. Guys, anything to add on the pyrolysis bit?
I think that's great. Very complete.
I think energy efficiency is a big question if I'm an investor. That's the one thing I'd be looking at.
Absolutely.
One of my top.
I've seen technologies that run more than 300% that energy requirement, and then of course, I wouldn't say it kills the business, but then your end products need to be really expensive to make up for the operating costs.
Yep.
Again, won't delve on that process. That is a slide I typically discuss with clients. This is a whole process, and really the key message is it's a very complex system, and we need to control all the boxes and all the materials. And the first thing is the selection of the tires. If you don't control the chemical composition of what goes in the pyrolysis, we cannot expect to have a controlled oil or controlled recovered carbon black. There's one thing missing, of course, and Shane, you mentioned that prior to the webinar. When we do the granulation, the steel gets out. Most part of the steel gets out. When we have little granules, that maybe only have 1% steel in it, we need to separate it after the pyrolysis. But the big part of the steel going out is during granulation before the pyrolysis. We go in the pyrolysis, then in the condenser, we separate the condensable gas, that is the oil, from the non-condensable gas, and the non-condensable gas typically can feed, again, the heat of the pyrolysis and maybe the drying of the recovered carbon black pellets. If you want to be environmentally compliant, we need a scrubber. Then the solid part, maybe 40% out of the pyrolysis, we need to separate metal, again, little pieces of metal. We need to mill. Granulate is typically wet, so we need to dry again. We need some energy. We sieve to have one pellet size only, and then we go into storage. Anything to add, Shane and Paul?
No, I think it looks good.
No, I think the you mentioned on it is if you're a tire pyrolysis operator, you have two choices of how to receive your raw materials. Are you taking in whole tires and granulating themselves? And if so, you have that 10 to 12% steel coming off, which you then sell and recycle. Or are you buying granulated crumb, and then you're coming in through this process here?
Yeah. Then we have the recovered carbon black, and the purpose of that image is to show you the difference to carbon black, because it's a mixture of carbon blacks, and then we have a payload of other things that are in the tire. And the carbon blacks and the inorganic content, sometimes called ash content, are depending on the feedstock. That's the reason we need to select the feedstock. And then the volatile contents and the fresh carbon, which is coming from the carbonization of the rubber polymer, if it stays very long time in the pyrolysis, that depends on the process. And we need to control the process to finish the pyrolysis, to have no volatiles. And also we want to minimize the fresh carbon because it inactivates the carbon blacks that used to be in the tire. What we get is a low CO2 emission product, 100% recycled. If we get the volatile content right, it also has a much lower PAH content. So that's polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And that is a material with nice green credentials.
I just wanted to jump. Let's go back to that one just very quickly. I just wanted to add something, just because I think that we have people on this stream who might not be familiar with tire making or tire components or tire recycling, and I just want to speak to something pretty basic here, which is if you look at that under the payload, the inorganic ash. What people need to keep in mind is that ash is coming from the silica in the tire, right? Silica in the pyrolysis process tends to come out as ash, and ash is obviously something that RCB producers have to deal with and contend with during their manufacturing process. That silica tends almost overwhelmingly to be used in the tread of the tire. Silica is used in a tire, at least highly dispersible silica, because it improves the rolling resistance of a tire. It makes the tire more fuel efficient. It's also very good for wet grip, so it's used in a lot of sort of winter tires or very high performance tires, Z-rated tires for sports cars and things like that. What that means is especially in a market like Northern Europe, or there are certain parts of Europe where they have a fairly affluent population and a fairly rigid regulatory system vis-a-vis tires. A lot of tires are taken off of cars in those markets well before they are, when they still have a lot of life on them. What that means literally is that they still have a lot of tread on them. And what that means is that when you're getting the ELT mix from those markets, you may be getting a lot of passenger car tires. It's less so for truck tires because truck tires can be retreaded, but passenger car tires are not retreaded in the West. Those tires are coming into the system with a heck of a lot more tread on them than would be normal if they were being used down to sort of the point at which they're no longer functional. And that can have a pretty significant effect on the actual output of your pyrolysis unit, because you're getting a lot more ash in those markets, in those applications, than you would normally. I just wanted to jump in and say that in some cases, the ELT mix is actually, what's good for sort of driving safety is maybe detrimental to the recovered carbon black process, which is to say, the newer the tire, the worse it is for pyrolysis.
For the recovered carbon black. Thank you, Paul.
Exactly. For RCB, at least what your end product's going to look like and how much ash you have to deal with.
Yeah. So the next one, Paul, do you want to continue? Because that is from our report, the old version. We are just now updating the figures.
Sure.
But maybe you can lead us through the volumes of the recovered carbon black supply.
Sure. Well, this just gives us sort of a, and as Martin said, we're working on this right now, sort of revising it and adjusting some of the schedules. I think many of the projects that we've been looking at are delayed by 6 months or possibly a year for various reasons we can talk about. But all that capacity is coming. Those projects are still active. But this shows sort of our notion of this is RCB1, right, Martin? This is really what we call one of the issues is standardization and nomenclature, which we can talk. We probably do a whole presentation on that. Many people have, but this is what we call RCB1, which is the highest quality level, basically competing with and working in tandem with virgin carbon in a premium application. So this is our number for global demand for that product, which is less than 100,000 tons as of 2021. As I mentioned earlier, the forecast is for 1 million tons by 2030. So that is a very aggressive growth forecast in terms of the amount of capacity that will need to be installed and operating by 2030. But this shows you the regional breakdown for our projection for 2024. Up to just below 350,000 tons by 2024. And you can see the regional breakdown there. We focus primarily on North America and Europe, particularly Europe as a core region for recovered carbon black based on some of the factors we've already talked about. Anything to add?
Quite impressive growth in Europe, isn't it? Where now most of the capacity really is in Asia. That is the dark blue bit. So there's a lot of sustainability driven capacity in Europe and North America coming up.
Yeah, and this is started up. So product for it to be producing in a year from now, you have to know about the plan. It has to be out there. It's just not announced. It's under construction as we speak.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I think it's also fair to say this is like peer reviewed. This is not Paul's opinion. This is Paul's and my opinion. We discussed all the announcement players very critically and put a lot of scrutiny on there. There's more players which we chose not to include in that version. And so again, we are reviewing the numbers in the new report. And now over to you, Shane, because recovered carbon black is not the only interesting product we have of the tire pyrolysis, right?
Yes, and I'll be relatively quick here, and I like the picture we have here: the good, the bad, the ugly. Good Clint Eastwood movie. But no, you look at anywhere from low 40s to maybe 50% of the inputs turn into oils, and those oils coming out, I think that the key factor, or one of the key things to note, is the composition of the tire itself being 20 to 30% natural rubber dictates that the oils themselves, when you pull out all the steel and other non-products that turn into the oil side of it, the carbon black as well, you push somewhere nearly 50% of these oils are biofuels. And in Europe and other geographies, that's a definition that gets you identified as a biofuel. Once you hit a biofuel, that impacts the pricing of the material that you have and whatnot. I mean, there was this past summer, there was an earnings call from a top 3 global chemical company that was asked by an analyst at the end of the earnings call, what are your forecasted premiums that you can obtain from sustainable materials? And his answer was materials coming out of our cracker, the ethylene cracker, let's call it, anyway, it was that they're going to charge, and they're currently charging $1,500 to $22 per metric ton premium for those materials. So in my mind, the raw materials that would be coming into a unit that can produce a premium, sustainable product like that should have some ratio of that 1500 to 2200. And not only should it correlate from an ethylene cracker to tire pyrolysis, it just gives you a feel of where premiums are in the polymer production supply chain. So it should apply to some degree here. It's a matter of what ratio you get and how you negotiate for that. Anyway, these oils, let's talk about the applications, because what you have here is some of the higher level qualities of them. It's closer in a density to a diesel than it is a carbon black feedstock. The sulfur is for is good and bad for depending on which market you're looking to put it in. You have some flashpoint issues you have to deal with. Quite often, tire pyrolysis companies are looking at doing different cuts and optimizations to make it viable for multiple markets. But I think and it's driven by the application scenarios, and you look at what are your drivers for where you want to sell your oils. And if you're coming after it from a sustainability factor, you have some applications that are combustion based. Combustion based means you're turning your oils and ultimately the tire that you recycled back into a CO2. So if you're putting it into a diesel application or a bunker fuel, you have to factor that in, that you're losing quite a lot of your let's call it greenness. And then there's other applications where you can put it through some processing and move it into a raw material feedstock that goes back into the chemical industry, that is either fed into a naphtha cracker or blended with products coming out, which then ultimately wind up in synthetic rubber and other products that go back into the tire. So you have applications that I would call are much greener or sustainable than others, and the values of those different markets vary greatly. I don't know if there's anything else I'd want to say other than when you look at these oils, there's a lot of different things you can do with the oils that vary the properties through optimization that requires an investment that dictates which market to put it in. Yet at the same time, you have to make your decision first, or what's your green drivers, what's the CO2 credits you're going to receive based on which market you put it in. So it's not, it is a bit of a complex evaluation and decision process of what you want to do with your oils, how to do it. Then you hit the questions of how do you move it, how do you store it, how do you blend it. A lot of the things that I discuss and dive in with companies that I deal with. But hey, you guys have heard me speak on. Anything else pop out at you that you think is pertinent to address?
Oh, you got the next slide as well. But
yeah.
in the meantime, I put a quick shout out to Michael, who is watching us from a ferry. Shane, maybe you can just finish off with that slide as well.
Yeah, again, my desire for pictures. I probably should have had this one before the other, but here's where, just to visualize what's happening. Probably should have been in inverted order. But if you're looking at, the black oil drop, that's the carbon black feedstocks. It's coming from the traditional sources of refineries, ethylene crackers, a byproduct of steel production. Those oils are utilized to produce the virgin carbon black that is then produced into the tire. The tire going through a tire pyrolysis. You have your RCB and your oils. Now you move to the bottom half of this chart here. You take those oils and you have some decisions to make. Do you put it through further processing? And I have distill, but that's just to cut it if you have flashpoint problems. There's other things you can do to remove hydrogen, chlorine, other things if you have problems, to put it into some specialty markets and solvents or others. But then you have that decision. If you're looking at the first large gray arrow, you have some decisions to be made there, driven by economics and the green factors of, if you want to be involved in combusting those oils in a bunker marine fuel, or if you want to be purely circular and putting them back into naphtha blend stock, which is that top arrow there, or carbon black feedstock. And you don't have to, these aren't exclusive. You can do some processing that allows you to split your oils, to cut them and put a light ends into one market and a heavies into the other market. And quite often both of those end applications would prefer that because it meets their specs closer. But anyway, that's the two things I would say, the two slides I would cover relative to the oils.
Shane, that is probably also, with the ISCC certification, maybe you can explain that a little bit. And I think there's two, there's the EU and Plus, and the one is for mass balance and the other one is renewable fuels, if I understood correctly.
Yeah, go with it if you want. If not, I can jump in. You tell me.
No, that's a question to you.
Oh, so what ISCC Plus allows quite often companies who are making claims on the, maybe claims is the wrong word, taking the overall LCA and benefits of the biofactor or the reduction in CO2, you need a company that comes in or a certifying board, ISCC Plus, that reviews your processes, your work mechanisms, ensures that you have processes in place, that you're buying your raw materials in a manner that's sustainable, and it just tracks the sustainability throughout your entire company, throughout your process, and states, yes, this is how it's done. It is this mechanism, and the CO2 credits that are being claimed on the other end are certified and by our companies and our process. It's a bit of an ISO type process, ISO 9001, 14001, but for sustainability in the company. So quite often we see all tire paralysis companies either having that or pursuing it rapidly if they haven't received it yet. And jump in if you have any other thoughts or comments, Martin or Paul.
Let me ask you a question, Shane. When you're talking about the oil as a carbon black feedstock, can you just talk very quickly about what, how that affects throughput and what it?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the top, going back to the top half of this chart, you look at those 4 bars coming in. The top 3 are the traditional ones. And
right.
Why are you buying oils? Primarily, you want oils that are highly aromatic with a high carbon content to pull out to become the carbon black. So that means you want materials that have obviously a lot of carbon. Carbon equals density. And so then you're now asking the question, can I put tire paralysis oil back into that? Tire paralysis oil on a crude basis, meaning you haven't touched it when it comes off of the tire paralysis process, wouldn't be viewed as the most ideal, viable carbon black feedstock because it's low in carbon content. It will actually reduce your overall yield if you're putting it back into a virgin carbon black furnace. So in general, what would happen is you would split that tire paralysis oil into 2. You would take a lighter cut and a heavier cut. The heavier cut, and heavier meaning more density, more carbon, can go back into a carbon black feedstock process. The lighter side, you would then have to decide, do I put that back into a chemical feedstock like an ethylene cracker, naphtha type chain, or do I sell it to blend into a bunker marine diesel pool to be further combusted? So that's how I would view it. It's not straight out of the tire paralysis process. It's not the most beautiful for a virgin carbon black company. But if you split it and cut it and take a light end and a heavy end, it makes it more viable.
Gotcha.
Paul, by now all the carbon black makers, at least the big ones, must be looking at alternative fuels, including circular, but also bio-based fuels, right, for the carbon black feedstock, right?
Yes, certainly.
Absolutely. And some of them have announced it, some others haven't, and are quietly doing it, but they're all pursuing various bio-based feedstocks, and this is one of them.
Yeah. Next one, I think that's me because I wrote the history. So that's the history of recovered carbon black, and we get in a moment to the challenges of the industry and where the industry is. First, paralysis really came up in the 80s, and I would say the oil crisis maybe in the US was a little bit earlier, 70s, Paul and Shane.
Sure.
In Europe in the 80s. And so companies thought, okay, how can we get additional oil volume? It was based, really driven by oil, and also oil as a combustion, as a fuel. First focused on what to do with a solid carbon residue coming out of the pyrolysis in 2000. Back then, I believe the product still was called CBP, carbon black with a P. That should actually be in the index. That should be carbon black pyrolytic. Nowadays, we call it recovered carbon black. Although it's another name that you can ask yourself, does it make sense or not? Because we're not really recovering the carbon black, but we're recovering, as we said, we're recovering more than just the carbon black. First interesting investment, Bridgestone in Delta Energy in the US, 2014. 2017, the ASTM D36 work group, because it became clear that the analysis tests that work for furnace carbon black, some might work for recovered carbon black, but not all. So it became clear that specific work group for recovered carbon black needs to work on methods and norms and standardization. The first norm was just the terminology that came out in 2019. 2020, Michelin invested in Scandinavian Enviro Systems, sometimes short called Enviro. Same year, BASF invested into Pyrum Innovations, and that was mainly driven by the chem cycle requirements for feedstocks. Not for combustible, but there's one nice application into sustainable nylon polyamide, and there's a German outdoor gear brand called VD. They do have an outdoor pant that is based on the mass balance production of polyamide in tire Paralysis oil. Nice example, when you can touch things, when you can buy things in the market. I like that. In 2021, the average recovered carbon black capacity, and there's not so many companies as you might think, 3.5 thousand tons per year. So that is still a small production level. Same year, Birla Carbon, Tier 1 carbon black maker, partners with Circtec for sustainable carbonaceous materials. Michelin, Bridgestone, RCB Rubber, call to action on the conference 2021 and 2022 as well again. 22, so last year, Continental invested in Pyrum Innovations, and that was driven not so much for the oil, but also for the recovered carbon black. For me, one of the highlights, I don't know what you think, you two, one of the highlights of the Berlin conference was Circtec REACH registration, because in Europe, chemical products need to be REACH registered or REACH exempt. And that's a big, that was a big challenge and also an obstacle for the tire industry to fully embrace recovered carbon black. Now there's a REACH registration, which is really good for the commercialization of the material. And at the back end of last year, I only heard about this from my friend Peter Tehar at Circtec. There's a new task group. And the reason I put this in, it's called RCB testing in rubber. So it's part of the D36 work group, subgroup 70. And what I found quite interesting is who is in there. So there's Continental Tire, they're quite active. Jorge is very active in ASTM. But there's also Bridgestone and Michelin. There's Birla Carbon. There's also Cabot, and Cabot were not very active on that topic. And there's Orion Engineered Carbon. So this is really a collaboration of many carbon black makers, many tire makers. I couldn't put everyone on. Of course, there's recovered carbon black makers in that task group as well. So really a good, strong group working on rubber testing for recovered carbon black, which I find very, very positive. And the last one, again, from Paul's and my report, we think that the average capacity by plant will be much bigger in 24. Now we can make that probably 25, Paul, because the industry is running a little bit late in capacity increases. Yeah. 13,000 tons recovered carbon black, and the corresponding amount of tires and tire Paralysis oil.
And I would say that's really a function of the industry moving from not pilot plant, but let's call it very small commercial units to larger scale multi-unit plants model. I would also say, Martin, I think you're being modest in that you didn't put the Recover Carbon Black Congress in there in 2018, which I do think, and has been held every year since then. I do think that's been fundamental in getting people together and sort of furthering this industry. And the last thing I would mention is again, you mentioned CircTech, and I do think that their work on that REACH registration is absolutely essential and really important. And, the more I talk to people, the more you realize that when we talk about permitting on the RCB side, we're really talking about both ends of the spectrum, the permitting on the side of production. But then on the other end, everyone's running into the classification of that product country to country, having difficulties with exporting a product from country A to country B because the terminology and the nomenclature and the standardization of those products is not the same from one to another. So I think that along with all the other work we're talking about, that piece of registering these products is going to be absolutely essential over the next couple of years to make sure that we're all countries are on the same sort of the same.
Make the milestone. And I think I have to say it wasn't CircTech alone. I would be unfair to Alpha Carbon. I think they registered together and worked together on it. Alpha Carbon in France.
Good.
So I should have mentioned Alpha Carbon and CircTech for the REACH registration. Now, we looked at the history and about all the things that is good. And I think the summary of that slide is that industry progress and evolution, Paul, is quicker than the furnace evolution, furnace carbon black evolution. Furnace carbon black has evolved over 80 years now, and carbon black as a commercial product, some 100 years and more, right? So here we have 40 years and getting quite some traction, although there's some loose ends, but quite impressive. Am I right?
I would say, I mean, definitely from the beginnings, but I would say functionally probably 10 years for RCB as a focus product. It's funny, Shane mentioned earlier that people are focusing on RCB. I think traditionally, the entire focus of Paralysis was on the oil, and the carbon black was, as Shane said, sold as a very low value combustion, sort of a fuel. As an afterthought, a waste product or an afterthought, and the industry has really turned around where the focus now, they're trying to figure out what to do with the oil because the focus has been on carbon black. And I think obviously, as we talked about, there has to be you have to have a dual focus. You have to focus on both equally to make for a functional business.
Yeah, and to look at it from that perspective, if you're the investor, you can. And hey, if this industry started with just oils and sustained itself on just oils,
right?
It's an interesting thing to think about from an economic perspective of, hey, now you have a product that's nearly equal in volume with 2 to 3x the price as an adder. Obviously, there's some extra capex and opex associated with that, but that's the history of where it came from. So, not a bad worst case scenario to look at,
right?
If you have problems with carbon black.
However, there's a couple of challenges as well. I have summarized the challenges in 3 parts. Paul, Shane, you alluded to some of the challenges already right at the start. One big challenge I see is strategy. Many companies that do have technology, they don't want to build their own technology and operate their own technology. So we're talking about R&D companies versus operators. And now, because we do this for financial people, for an investor, it's very difficult just to look at computer drawings and not see a plant that is operating. So that is a challenge. And the second challenge I mentioned here is the cash flow, because these R&D companies, they don't make cash flow. But the companies that quickly operate themselves, they can generate cash flow from the sales of materials. And the cash flow really is the lifeblood of any business. And you might be short on cash flow in pre-seed and seed, but you can only develop so much without needing a lot of cash flow, employing people, employing engineers. So cash flow is a big thing. And that calls for equity investors. And that is one of the major challenges of the industry. there's a lot of impact investment money around, but still for the startups like tire paralysis companies, it's very, very difficult to find the first equity investors. What do you two think?
Yeah, would agree.
Yeah, I agree. If you're that investor or banker looking to look at this industry, and you have someone who owns the technology versus someone who's just licensing it, and you have those two different factors, you're not only, if you're dealing with just a project developer, you're not only evaluating him, you're evaluating the person behind them, and that's the technology provider, probably more so than you are, the people who have to execute it on this end. And I would go that step further and go back and ask the questions on both products. What are its specifications? Is it accepted in industry? And really dive in and ask for that proof and verify that it's out there, it's running, it's being accepted before you're going to invest in their licensee / operator in a new region. Is what I would want to have. And I think that's a big difference. And Martin, going back to what, I gave a little bit of my thoughts on what makes a tire paralysis company successful. And I think, number one is more or less people in the corporate structure to implement it. And it really, when you look at that one, it really does come down to the people. How have they worked with the investment world? Even your first bullet point, how did they work with the investment world and develop those relationships to have the cash flow to support their future growth of their own technology or the one they're licensing? And anyway, I don't want to go down that same conversation I went through earlier, but I think that's what it really ties into.
Can you just talk quickly about that number 3, Martin, the reach and EOW end of waste? Because when we talk to suppliers, that's just become absolutely a key issue. So do you want to just address that a little bit, what you're talking about there for people who might not be familiar with that terminology?
Yes, of course. If you allow, I quickly run through the other things, because I think it ties in. If a company doesn't have done, and that's maybe also a selection criteria for investors, a company that hasn't carried out product development doesn't show market focus, and the market focus brings the cash flow. So the second bullet point of number 1 goes back to cash flow, but also clearly because recovered carbon black is not yet a commodity, Paul, it's impossible to get a contract without having a plant running, right, on recovered carbon black. You might get it for the oil, but you certainly don't get carbon black or recovered carbon black contracts without having the actual industrial manufacturing side. Risk management is one big thing, insurances, EPC company, and again, financing at the right technology level. And I believe investors need to be a little bit more flexible, not requesting TRL 9 or 8, but maybe TRL 6, which is pilot stage, is a credible entry point to the industry, where you can see a pilot plant running, where you can meet the people. I think I would advocate for that. Coming, Paul, to permits and regulatory, I thought this is the big one, but now I'm thinking it's, it falls into place somehow. This, of course, is a little bit skewed to Europe, because I'm based in Berlin in Europe, but we have similar developments across the world. The REACH registration was a major obstacle. Now we have REACH registration by Alpha Carbon and CircTech. Of course, we need to make sure that the recovered carbon black can fulfill the sameness approach, which means it needs to be similar, comparable to the recovered carbon black they have registered. They registered 3 different, let's say, boundary conditions of 3 recovered carbon blacks. Batch system, the former Carbon Cleantech, which CircTech has acquired. Alpha Carbon, which is an auger-type continuous system. And then the CircTech, which is a fluidized bed continuous system. So you can say that's a wide bracket of boundary of specification for the recovered carbon blacks. But it comes down to, does the recovered carbon black of the companies that want to piggyback on the REACH registration, is it similar? Can they, in face of ECHA, the European Chemicals Agency, can they explain, yes, we fulfill in the same specification, we want to participate in the REACH registration? End of waste, really, we're talking about a highly engineered product, end of waste. There's 4 criteria in Europe, and basically the big one is the marketability, the existence of a customer, functionalization in the market, and not being toxic, which would all be ticks in the box. But the problem, as you both said, is that every country is different, and recovered carbon black could be a product, industrial product, in one country where you have the end of waste, and then you cross in the transport to the customer, you cross another country where recovered carbon black doesn't have that end of waste status, and that makes it very, very difficult. So I think there is some governance, some legislation required to help these green products to get into market quicker.
Yes.
And but then again, I think the traction last year on regulatory, especially permits. I mean, I didn't put a sub point, but permits in many countries of the world, the pyrolysis is still regarded as incineration facility because they don't have the category for pyrolysis yet. Pyrolysis is too small. In the US and also Europe, less than 1% of the tires are recycled by pyrolysis. It will change quickly. 24, 25, that will be visible. And then, I think that triggers. But now the permits are in a different category. So these are the challenges. And I think we live really at the intersection of these challenges between the companies and the investors. And that is the next point is the future collaboration. And what we do, we give some examples without giving names of collaborations and what we three could offer you as an investor or financial company, a bank, what we could do. One certainly I did already with Shane, industry benchmarking, ranking, technology, selection, evaluation, risk evaluation. Shane, would you like to give some broad outline of what we offer in that space? Shane, your micro is muted for some reason.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Okay, now you're there.
I was following your instructions on the side to mute the computers if you weren't speaking. Hoping that I wasn't the person creating the noise. Without diving too much into that specific project, it was, everything from helping understand what the technology options are, what are the benefits, pros and cons of various types of technology. Then you have a thought process of, okay, that technology's chosen, who's out there in that realm. And then it was, okay, looking at each of those, what are the requirements and criteria for inputs? What are the output criterias? What are the markets? What are the values? What are the risks? How do you handle moving those products from your site to, now I'm speaking a little bit to the oils. Now that oil product, it's not as easy as moving a powder or a pellet. How do you handle moving that from point A to B? Can it be blended? What companies are out there that do that? And things along those lines. It dove into those details as well as the overall holistic approach, just the whole industry in its entity, permitting process. It was, I don't think we missed anything. I think we went beginning to end, all factors, risks, technology choices, and whatnot. And that can be, that was with a potential investor operator, and you can take that same process and apply it to an investor. Take that same approach and put it into a due diligence project on behalf of someone who's looking into invest in this, and just take our opinion and help it guide your decision process, or then however you define your own risks. We can provide a lot of those answers that help you define what level of risk is out there for you, and if that's then your decision, if that's an acceptable one or not.
Absolutely. And one thing is, you and I, and also Paul, we might work alongside the value chain. So when we work with investors, we make sure that we don't select the technology, but we help the consulting client to find the selection criteria, because in the end, they need to select the best partner for them, and we can help them along the way. But we don't shortcut by giving them our selection.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you're in anyone's shoes who's talking to us, you know, the first question that I always want to put people at ease at is, you know, confidentiality, intellectual property, and then where do we work, and how do we touch others? And then I think one thing that I give all of us credit on is, you know, this is a small industry, and your lifeblood is confidentiality, your reputation, and how you carry yourself. And we probably wouldn't be here if we made one mistake and passed on the wrong piece of information. You know, there's obviously NDAs always in place, but an NDA is also only as good as the person behind it. So I think all three of us are here because of our integrity, our adherence to our principles of maintaining that confidentiality. And you probably even heard it coming out here where we talk. We obviously when we say top companies, we know the companies. We don't disclose anything of that sort. And I think if I'm on the other end of that relationship approaching us, that's one of the things I want to know is, you know, one, are you knowledgeable, and two, do you maintain a non-biased opinion that also maintains a integrity and confidentiality? And obviously I'm evaluating myself, but I like to say that all three of us check those boxes, or we wouldn't be doing this for, you know, 10 to 20 plus years for some of us.
Sure.
Absolutely. Second point, plant process. That's an example. I did feedstock industry reports in Germany. We have an open market for end-of-life tires. And open markets tend to be very obscure. Regulated markets have transparency and reporting, but the open markets are really difficult to understand. So I did a complete value chain analysis. Where do the tires go? Who are the companies? It's not 100% analysis because it's very difficult to get numbers add up, but this is like an in-depth feedstock report. The tire pyrolysis plants of the future, they need a lot of tires. And you want to contract them way ahead, 10 years, 20 years, so you need to understand the feedstock reports. On the products, really, I'm thinking Paul's Carbon Black World Data Book to start with, and the perspectives for recovered carbon black. But Paul, we also worked for one of your consulting clients, a recovered carbon black producer in the US, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of market and pricing for recovered carbon black?
Sure.
So on the market and pricing, there is ready-made reports, but of course the biggest value an investor would get working closely together with us, so that we can tailor exactly to their requirements.
Definitely.
Yep.
Introduction to customers and partners, that's pretty much like scouting, and that of course encompasses product development ahead of that already. So perhaps that should be the other way around. And I think the three of us, we are a good team, and we can cater all the aspects of such an industry, recovered carbon black, with along the whole value and supply chain.
Sure.
Absolutely. And do we have any questions? I think that, Martin, this is our last one, right?
We don't have, that's the last slide, and we don't have questions. So I would take the opportunity to ask us anything we missed, or to wrap up from you, Shane and Paul, and then we wrap up the webinar. We're overrunning already some 35 minutes. But I think we put up some really good value for free in this webinar for companies that want to learn about recovered carbon black and tire pyrolysis.
That just shows that we're willing to go the extra mile, even in a free webinar.
Absolutely, and then we collaborate well together, the three of us.
Let me just jump in and just say, Martin, great presentation. Thanks. Martin pulled all this together and really is the glue that holds this together. So thanks so much for that. But I would just say, you know, Martin and I, we've been updating and the Recover Carbon Black report. We've been talking to a lot of people on the RCB side. I would just say, because this is geared toward financial people, I would just say that there's a couple of constant refrains we hear from every producer. One of those obviously is the regulatory side, but the big piece, I think, right now, I mean, as we're looking at this industry, I think RCB has proven its mettle in terms of whether RCB can be used in premium products, and I think that question has been answered. So as we talked about in the report last year, and I think is reiterated in this report, scale up is really the issue for the next 10 years if we're going to get to anything approaching that number we've talked about. And the big piece there is financing. And I think that there's a lot of people out there interested in investing in this sector. I think we've shown that the growth prospects are there. I think we've shown that it's a sector that really deserves serious scrutiny from anyone who's interested in potentially investing. We've heard over and over from suppliers who are eager to expand, who have proven their product, and that really are lacking only that financial piece to double or triple or quadruple their capacity. So I think that the promise is there, and I think we're really looking at a crucial moment in the industry that we really need the investment right now. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yes. One potential investor has just commented, thanks for sharing perspective on the Pyro and RCB. Thanks, Virendra. Good to thanks for your comment, and thanks for watching.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, and my co-presenters here. Absolutely great work, and Martin and Paul, as always, enjoy working with you and continue in the future.
Are we done?
Thank you all. We're done. The last thing is I'm running the banner. If anyone may be watching the webinar later on, not live, wants to ask us a question, here's my email, Paul's email, and Shane's email. And just let us know if you want to talk to us about the topic and you have questions that you couldn't ask in the webinar.
Great.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Shane. That was enjoyed very much doing that with you, and thank you for running the webinar with me. I'll talk with you very soon.
We'll talk again.
Have a great day.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.